Okay, so sustainable urban drainage systems, or I guess as people are familiar call them SuDS, be good to understand. I think the government announced something the other week, but I know regardless of political views, governments announce things and then when they actually happen, the time frame might be a little bit extended. But so where are we with SuDS right now?
Well, it sounds very optimistic after quite a long time. I think I came across SuDS back in 2007, a long time ago, when I set up a little business selling Hebden X grass grids. And then in 2010, we were really excited because the flood and water management came out, was released, and recommended the inclusion of SuDS in. It sounds like it's going to be actually written into English planning legislation. Obviously, it's already in place in Wales, and Scotland have adopted SuDS. Scotland have been way ahead of the game. Scotland have been using these kind of systems and these techniques for a long time. Wales, I think it was 2019 that it was sort of enshrined in law in Wales, and it's made a big difference in Wales. So I'm really optimistic. I think it's been a long time coming, and obviously there are barriers to overcome, but at least we can start getting involved in them now. And we often talk about the fact that in the sustainability space generally, it's either the carrot or the stick that motivates people, and doing the right thing will get you so far, but people need the stick now, and it sounds like it's coming in. So the SuDS standard, the national SuDS standards, are due to be enshrined in planning law, in English planning law at least, in I think early 2024. So fingers crossed.
And in terms of where we need to be, obviously when that comes through, that would be a massive help. But I mean, we can't avoid on the news once a week there's all this furore about sewage going to rivers and stuff like that. So I mean, how bad is this situation? Has that always been going on, and it's only just that the media's caught hold of it, or is it because of things we're perhaps going to discuss around climate change and stuff? But where do we need to be in terms of help with SuDS to sort of clean up help with the drainage and the sewage problem?
The flooding is definitely on the increase, and that's what SuDS, good SuDS design is all about: reducing pressure on our overburdened sewage system. So there's a number of factors all coming into play that are creating the issue. First of all, and climate change is definitely part of it. Absolutely. It's raining more frequently, it's raining more intensely, and it's raining for longer periods of time. And quite simply, that's, I'm no climate scientist by any means, but hot air holds onto more water than cold air. So when it does rain, it's got more rain to release. In addition, we've got to accept that as urban development is on the increase, we've been developing over absorbent land. So whereas rainwater would previously fall down, land on the earth and have a chance to soak down into the ground, instead it's being intercepted by hard surfaces. So we were getting large volumes of water landing on hard surfaces, and that water's traveling at high speeds and in large volumes into our sewage network. And our sewage network wasn't designed to cope with that kind of volume. So that's why we're seeing the sewage network being overburdened, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing sort of discharge into watercourses, which obviously we want to avoid. So what SuDS is all about is about slowing the flow of water into those sewage things. It's not a panacea that's going to solve all of the flooding issues, but if you can hold back water and let as much of it infiltrate into the ground as possible, and slow the rate and reduce the volumes that go into the sewers, then the sewers have got more chance to cope with the volume of water that goes into them. It's that straightforward, really. So that's kind of the one of the principles behind good SuDS design, anyway.
Yeah, and I mean, before we drill down into that a bit more, I mean, I always like to think, I mean, we're getting wetter winters, drier summers, and it'd be lovely, logical to get all that extra rain, and then have it so that when it's dry in the summer, and I think there are some reservoirs online, and we're perhaps digressing slightly, but it just is that too much of a pipe dream, or do you think slightly away from SuDS, but it's possible maybe to address those issues? So rather than, as you say, I mean, SuDS obviously slows down the flow, but would it be possible to capture more of this flood water in some shape or form and store it ready for dry summers, or is that just engineeringly, sorry, that's not a word, it's in terms of engineering terms, is that just too complicated or expensive?
I mean, it's a noble aspiration, I think, and what we should be doing with good water management is to hold on to water when we've got too much of it, hold it back, and then use it when we need it, because it's an incredibly valuable resource. And for centuries we've been sort of diverting it away from infrastructure. As soon as rainfall lands on a development or near to some kind of near to your home or near to some kind of infrastructure, the sort of the main motivator has been to get rid of it, to divert it away, to send it somewhere else. So certainly, it would be more sensible to kind of capture that, hold on to it, because you're going to need it. When the summer comes along, whether it's for irrigation or whether it's for whatever reason, or for amenity purpose, even, to create a more sort of attractive sort of place for urban cooling. Water provides all sorts. It provides a myriad of benefits. So enlightened designers are starting to latch onto this. To take your question, I think one of the issues is that because the population's growing, there's much more demand on the water network. And it's a really complex, there are so many stakeholders and so many different parts involved that it would be perhaps a little bit simplistic to sort of to imagine that we can hold on to enough to solve the problems. But you're right, it's definitely two sides of the same problem, and by sort of dealing with one side, you're certainly going to mitigate the worst effects of the other. So it's the water sort of the water cycle in our country and globally as well is an interesting problem to fix, and I think it's useful to break it down into little pieces, little chunks, and sort of see what you can do to deal with it a bit at a time.
And in terms of the sort of back to SuDS, I mean, it's fair to assume that the flooding events that we see, I mean, once upon a time the other described as once in a 200-year event, or but they're happening sort of almost every year in some part of the UK. So we've got to get used to the fact that they're going to happen more frequent, and also I guess the severity potentially, as you say, if warm, back to the science of warm air holds more water than when it is discharged, there's going to be a lot more of it. So SuDS, and obviously the legislation is going to acknowledge that, but SuDS can't come soon enough in terms of helping to address what the future looks like when it comes to flooding. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I every year it's in the news, you'll read about unprecedented flooding events, and they're not unprecedented, are they? Because they happened 6 months before and 6 months before that, and it's there's a reason why it's happening, or there are a number of factors have conflated to mean that it's more likely to happen. So it's absolutely right that we should be thinking about things differently, and so much in this space is just about that. Thinking about approaching things in a slightly different way and doing things differently to how we did them 6 months ago. And by doing that, we can make a real material difference. And of course, the beauty of good SuDS design, and this is something that I think the landscape architects have got their heads around, is that if you do it well, if you do it properly, you get so much more than just good water management. I mean, that's enough. It'd be, it's a better way to manage water, certainly, but you get so many more benefits from a well-designed SuDS scheme in terms of green infrastructure and biodiversity net gain and mental health benefits. People like it because good SuDS is all about managing water on the surface. It's all about sort of capturing water where it falls, holding on to it, letting it infiltrate where you can, and then slowing the flow down somewhere. A lot of that can happen using soft planting, using swales. A swale's just a grassed channel, effectively, or reed beds, or attenuation. An attenuation pond is a pond, right? It's just a ditch in the, a hole in the ground, effectively. And in a storm event, that will fill up with water. It might be dry for a lot of the time, but in a storm event, it'll fill up with water. But because it's planted all around with trees and reeds, and it cleans the water that falls into it, the water infiltrates down into the ground. But you've got this beautiful pond in your development that adds value to your development and adds real sort of visual appeal. So if you're a housing developer and you're looking to try and make trying to charge more for your development, for your houses, and you start seeing SuDS legislation kicking in, you might be scratching your head thinking, oh, this is going to be problematic or troublesome or expensive. If you see it as an opportunity, and if you embrace it and you think, well, if I'm going to cram as much of these green features in as I can, you're going to end up with a more attractive development that you can charge more for. Again, I'm being slightly simplistic. There are lots of issues around that, but it's a good place to start from, isn't it? It's a good place to consider in the first instance.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of the sort of next stage, I mean, are there enough SuDS experts? And I mean, in terms of the expertise, I guess we're looking at everything from, as you say, the very earliest planning phase, because once someone started building a housing estate, they maybe think, oh, right, I better think about SuDS now. It's possibly too late, or they won't get the optimum solution. So how important is it to think of SuDS, obviously throughout the whole sort of building cycle, whether it's a housing estate, industrial estate, road infrastructure, etc. Just how important is it, and what sort of expertise is out there to help people understand their options?
It's grown an awful lot over the past decade or so, but we're still quite a long way short. Obviously, there's excellent guidance in the Syria SuDS manual that talks about all aspects of SuDS and recognizes where to use different features, and gives very practical, pragmatic guidance of how to use it. So I think designers, people right at the start of the process, have got those resources available to them. There is still a lot of it's still a lot of myths surrounding good SuDS design. People are still nervous about it, and there are, as I said earlier, there are issues about there are issues about how to design and install these systems. A lot of it is down to installation as well, because by the time a designer has designed the perfect system and then drawn up the perfect system and it's been signed off by planning, it then goes to a contractor who's perhaps never installed this kind of system before. So the contractor needs support as well. But I suppose the optimistic point is that that you've got designers who know what they're talking about. You've got good guidance from Syria. And from a manufacturer's point of view, we design permeable paving systems, which are a good, pragmatic, sustainable drainage solution. From our point of view, we're motivated to make sure those systems fit and work well. So it's absolutely in our interests to make sure these systems work. So we'll support contractors with that as well. So there's plenty of support and plenty of guidance. And because people are being forced to use them, then it's going to start the commonplace. So that's why I'm optimistic about it.
Okay, so I mean, you've already outlined some of the ways and all the sort of SuDS solutions, but I'm wondering if you can give us a sort of as comprehensive view. I mean, I say people, you mentioned your permeable paving. I think people probably seen car parks being built with the sort of milk crates underneath for storing water there. And then if you watch, I guess, some of the nature programs, they're introducing beavers sort of upstream to, with their dams to slow water and all that. So does it matter? I mean, how SuDS is defined, but what would you say, or how wide ranging are the potential solutions?
They're really wide ranging, and it's interesting that you mentioned beavers as well, because that's all part of the solution. And it's really important to remember that the SuDS standards recognise that not one system or product should be precluded. But basically, a good water management design consider all sorts of different approaches and products and systems with the same end in mind. It's just important to consider them in the right order. So consider the sort of water management hierarchy, if you like. So because I live in the Calder Valley, so I got very vested interest. That's why I'm interested in this kind of in this kind of work, because I've got vested interest in making sure my house doesn't get flooded. So we've got a very steep-sided valley. If you can stop using natural flood management techniques, slow the flow of water up here, that's not going to be a designer or a developer that's doing that. That'll be sort of whether it's rewilding it with beavers at the top or using natural flood management techniques to dam up rivers and streams, spread the water out so it'll infiltrate, and at least it'll slow the flow down. Then as you come down the side of the valley, you can do more and more interventions, whether it's swales or ponds or permeable paving on the hard landscaping. And then by the time you get into the tight urban spaces at the bottom, hopefully you've reduced the flow rate and reduced the volume, so it's much easier to cope with the volume of water at the bottom. But by the time you get into these tight urban spaces, you might not have the space to put nice green urban features, nice green supplanted features in. So at that point, you might need to use underground tanks. You might need to use underground to attenuate water and to convey it, to take it away from from your infrastructure. You might even need, and we see examples of it down here, you might even need to build retaining walls, which is kind of the antithesis of SuDS, but it's a necessary and sensible part of a sensible water management technique or philosophy, as long as you've used SuDS wherever you can further up in the system to generate all the multiple benefits you get from a good SuDS design.
And is SuDS all about new infrastructure, or is it possible, because obviously we've got a fairly substantial, courtesy of our Victorian forebears, sewer net infrastructure, is it possible to sort of adapt and put, insert things within that to help on the SuDS, or is it largely a question, as I say, of building completely new solutions elsewhere in the overall sort of water cycle?
It's not. It does lend itself to retrofit. So if you're doing it properly, you don't need to dig down and dig great big holes, put things in. It's mainly about changing what's going on the surface. So the Landscape Institute about 6 or 7 years ago did a really nice campaign all about nibbling, they called it. So if you nibble away at the hard landscaping and open that hard landscaping up to create features that will absorb rainfall and sort of direct the rainfall across the hard surfacing to soft planted areas. If you think about your driveway, for example, there's legislation to stop the rainfall that falls on your driveway being directed onto the road, but it's happened for years. Rainfall, a lot of driveways are geared just to get the water off it, so they slope towards the road, so that's directing. All you'd need to do potentially to make your driveway SuDS compliant, or to reduce putting additional pressure on the sewer, if you would just put a simple channel at the end of your driveway that would collect the water that was rolling towards the road, and then direct the water from that channel into your garden, into a soakaway in your front garden, all of a sudden all the rainwater that falls on your drive isn't going into the sewer. It's just going straight toward, it's going towards a soakaway, so that soakaway will fill up in a storm event. Most of the time it'll be dry and not causing anybody any problems, but in a in a storm event it'll fill up with water and then it'll soak down over time. So usually retrofit is fairly simple. It's just about understanding the principles and understanding what you can do. And and if you're if you're creative about it, you should be able to create a more attractive, more usable, useful space than you would have done just by burying the water straight away and getting rid of it.
And in terms of making this sort of happen, obviously the legislation's going to come in, but I guess there are different ways. But I don't know, but there may be different interpretations possible. So, and I know the construction industry sometimes, cost is its sole driving force, and they say, oh, we've got to do that.
Sometimes, Bill. Did you say?
Well, okay,
sometimes?
okay. I was trying to be generous there,
but
are you confident, if you like, that with some good education, everyone will understand and get on board what's being done, or will you be slightly nervous that I say the folks putting up the houses and stuff will just say, well, that's going to cost me, extra money, and so I'll sort of pay lip service to SuDS, so they can maybe tick the box, but not actually do what would really be of major benefit.
I think there's plenty of studies that have proven that if you consider SuDS right at the beginning of the design process and consider that as part of your master planning, it certainly shouldn't cost you more. It's only when you've gone through the process, you've designed your development, and then somebody says, right, you need to put SuDS in, and you go, oh, right, well, I'll have to, that's when it starts getting expensive, and that's when people start sucking their teeth and decide they don't like it. If you get involved right at the start, get an enlightened designer, and there are plenty around. It's a growing army of sort of fascinating people in this space. But get somebody involved who's going to understand it and get under the skin of it and understand the hierarchy, the water management hierarchy, and you'll probably find that it won't be more expensive. And as I say, that all the multiple benefits that you can get from including better water management features extend to charging more for the houses that you sell on a development that's got more green infrastructure. We did even if you're looking at retrofit as well, we worked on a fascinating project with business in the community 7 or 8 years ago now, where we retrofit SuDS features into a school in South Manchester. What that meant was that they managed all the surface water on site, so they didn't have to pay disconnection. They didn't have to pay discharge rates. They disconnected from the outflow from the mains. So that meant that because they weren't paying that fee, within 3 years, the slight sort of changes that we'd made to the topography of the school had paid for themselves. So the school was quids in after 3 years. But on top of that, the teachers were really excited about all the benefits that they were getting, the educational benefits from having these balancing ponds outside the classroom, because of course you get all the nature and the biodiversity that comes into these pools, gave them educational opportunities. And I think what's, when you hear good SuDS designers talk about these things, they kind of talk about it in a, you've got to be evangelical about these things if you want to change things. But they talk about when it rains, traditionally everybody goes inside and shuts the door. But if you've got good SuDS design, certainly in schools and educational spaces, for example, but imagine it on a development as well. If you've designed the water so it flows beautifully around your scheme, then as soon as it rains, kids are putting their wellies on and they're putting their raincoats on because they want to go outside. They want to see this stuff in action. So it's just a mindset change, really. I think. Yeah, we can talk about the issues later because I'm making it sound all really straightforward, and unfortunately, it isn't quite that. But if you start from the point of view that it's not necessarily more expensive, get involved from the start, and you can really sort of create a better space, a better public space, then yeah, why wouldn't you do it? I think that's the place to start from anyway, and then you can trip over the issues as as they come and sort of deal with them piece by piece.
And I suppose, in summary, I mean, are you optimistic that, what the government has announced, and then when it comes into force, that will be the catalyst for SuDS sort of hitting the mainstream, or do you just worry slightly that, if it's left up to the local authorities, I guess, to sign off, or to sort of police it, because I imagine in most cases they're the people that will actually sign off the development and therefore be the ones policing the SuDS, etc. Do you worry a little bit about that, or are you pretty much optimistic that once this legislation is enacted, then SuDS is sort of, say, it's been around for a while, as you said, but it'll hit the mainstream and we won't look back?
I think I'm definitely optimistic. I think you're right. We know that local authorities are, really sort of stretched at the moment. So putting more pressure on them to sort of sign these systems off requires a lot of understanding, and it requires some really detailed sort of thinking that I think we need to skill people up. I know developers don't, they work on pretty tight margins, so it's really important that they get their heads around the fact that they need to include this at the start of the process rather than trying to bolt things on at the end, because that's when it starts getting expensive. But I just look at what's happened in Wales, and absolutely, within months of the legislation kicking in, planning applications were being refused because SuDS hadn't been considered. So that people have, it's that thing, isn't it? I was talking about the carrot and the stick earlier. If you embrace SuDS and you like it, that's great. And if you don't embrace it and you don't like it, well, sorry, you're going to have to get used to it, because that's the way it's going. So yeah, I'm absolutely optimistic. But to come back to the point that I was making earlier, and the standards kind of recognize this, that as a purist, I might want sort of these beautiful open green features all over every development all the time, but it's not always practical. And as long as you can demonstrate that you've considered them, and as long as there are reasonable practical reasons why they're not appropriate, then sometimes it might be absolutely the right thing to do to use a more traditional channel and pipe system. What the standards are there to do is to force people to consider more sustainable options first. But if you can't put for practical, pragmatic reasons, if you can't put a sustainable system on, then you're not going to be penalized if you can't do it. But you've got to at least demonstrate that you considered it, you've thought about it, and most people, when they consider it and think about it, will go for it anyway, because it's a better option.
Okay, we covered a fair amount of ground, and I'm really grateful for your time. So, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.